Welkom bij alweer de 18e editie van Skin Deep, een talkshow van de Rode Hoed. Nou hebben we bij Skin Deep echt heel veel verschillende gasten gehad, maar nog nooit een schrijver uit Kenia, Oost-Afrika om precies te zijn. En ik vond het ontzettend leuk om te mogen spreken met Nanjala Nyabola. Ze schreef dit boek, Traveling While Black. Essays inspired by a life on the move. Meer dan 70 landen bezocht ze en ze had er van alles over te vertellen. Hello everyone and welcome to a special edition of Skin Deep, a talk show that discusses the various elements and layers of race, discrimination and inequality. And I'm very delighted tonight to introduce our guest, Nanjala Nyabola, a writer and political analyst from Kenya, East Africa. Her work focuses on the intersection between technology and politics, as well as migration and human mobility. And in her latest book, Traveling While Black, Essays Inspired by a Life on the Move, she explores the world and challenges common assumptions about human mobility. I enjoyed reading all her essays about her travels from Nepal, Botswana, Sicily, Haiti, New York, and Nairobi. You should do that too. The lens from which she looks into the world opens minds and confronts, and at moments brought me to tears. I was also laughing, I must say. Professor of History of Africa and the African Diaspora, the legend Hakim Adi, said, a unique and provocative and thoughtful collection of essays about her book. The New York Times said it's a rigorous meditation on what it means to move through the world as a Black African woman. Thought-provoking. Tonight, we will discuss what it feels like to move through a world designed to limit and exclude her. Her experiences as a Black woman who has traveled to more than 70 countries, and what travel can tell us about our sense of self, home, belonging, and identity. I would like to welcome you to Skin Deep, Nanjala.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
It's a blessing. Your book is a game changer. It's a voice that we need to hear more of. But we're in Amsterdam. This is Skin Deep. And in my research, I found something. You lived in Amsterdam. You were in Holland. So now
I lived in Den Haag.
Den Haag. Spill
the
tea. Spill the tea. Did you like Holland, or was this, because you're very honest in your book, you're like, this place is horrible. I had to pee on the corner of the... So tell us, what's up with Holland?
It was a very interesting experience. I love the parks. And for me as a woman, one of the things that I really loved about living in the Netherlands was how I could cycle to the nightclubs and cycle home by myself and be safe. I love being able to walk around and cycle, and that freedom, when you grow up in a lot of urban spaces, like, Nairobi doesn't have any bike paths, doesn't really have any cycling infrastructure. So I really appreciated that and that level of freedom. Yeah. I think one interesting thing I found about the Netherlands was in most places, it wasn't the anti-Black racism that hit me first. It was the anti-Arab racism that a lot of people experience first, because I think when you've been to the US, when you've been to other places where anti-Black racism in the narrow sense is more in your face, you're kind of on edge about it. Like, you're just like, I'm ready and I'm waiting for that sort of thing. But I was really surprised at the time at how easily a lot of people that I encountered would say things about, Moroccans and North Africans, and think that I would want to be part of that conversation. I'd be like, why would you be comfortable saying that to me? Why would you say that to me? And like, I think, and people who I didn't expect that from, it was like, I had a similar experience when I was in the Czech Republic, where people would say things about Roma people and think that they were not being racist. And I was like, it's the same thing that you're doing. You're just not doing it to me. And the idea that I would want to be part of that is very strange to me. I think that the Netherlands was it was a lot of interesting conversations, people with different backgrounds. There's so many people from different backgrounds, and people, group identities working. This is one of the points that I made in the book. Group identities work in different ways in different contexts. And in as much as I had all of these new freedoms in terms of cycling, in terms of exploring the countryside by myself, cycling from Den Haag to Delft to Amsterdam, like it was such a freeing thing. But then sort of this other side of this identity race question, which is, I think Dutch people as a whole kind of just need to have more conversations about the kind of society, the societies that they want to build. I think, and like, again, in the US, people spend a lot of time thinking about African American, sort of the black-white dichotomy, but of course, humans are just a plethora of identities. And so like, there's so many Indonesian people in the Netherlands and people from Suriname. And I was just really fascinated by how all of these dynamics sort of came together. And I think that there is a lot of space for a lot more conversations about this. And I think there's a lot more inclusion that I think could happen in different ways. But I honestly, on the whole, I had a great time. I think, I had fun.
You hit me with this book because I am also one of those Dutch people. And even though I am the host of a show where we discuss racism and we point fingers at white people and asking them to do their homework, you showed me in Traveling While Black that I, as a Black Dutchman, am not aware enough of the plight of the refugees.
Yeah.
So because how should we deal with that? Like, so I'm Black, I'm anti-racism, but at the same time, there's people hitting the shores here in Europe who come from our continent, and I'm just having my tea and coffee, and so what's your take on that aspect of being here?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that once your eyes is open to it, you can't close them again. Once you start to appreciate what's happening in the world in terms of refugees, I mean, you saw what happened in Haiti with the Haitian refugees and migrants in the United States, sending horses and whipping people sort of back in the water. Like, the global situation with refugees and migrations has deteriorated so much in the last 20 years. And there's just not enough awareness of not only that the situation is as bad as it's ever, or as the worst that it's ever been, but also that there's a racist dimension to what's happening. There's a racist dimension to the way policy is being created and being implemented. That means that Black refugees, Black migrants, are bearing the brunt of some of these policy choices because they are Black. So when you think about the disparities between how Haitians are being treated in the it's bad enough that Latin Americans are being held in cages and being separated from their children. That's already like really despicable, human behavior. But now we're seeing Haitians being whipped back and being beaten back. Like, it's like there's a level of tolerance for cruelty that is intricately connected to how the rise of the right, especially in Europe, but also in North America. And this narrative that normalizes cruelty to people of specific racial backgrounds in the name of migration policy. When we see what's happening in the Mediterranean Sea, that it's become acceptable to let people die. Like, in the last 20 years, we've gotten to a point where every week, even right now as we're speaking, right, it's not the 3,000, 4,000 deaths that we saw in 2017, 2016, but it's still happening. Boats are capsizing in the Mediterranean Sea because the European Union has said we're not going to do humanitarian assistance for boats that in Australia, we're talking about people leaving Papua New Guinea, leaving Myanmar, and the decision to actually detain people indefinitely with no hope of, ever coming out of that system into a normal livelihood because they were seeking asylum. And if you see it as part of the story of where the world has come from and where the world is going, and that's when I wrote the essay about the Mediterranean Sea, that's really what I was trying to tell people is stop looking at this boat that capsized today and this boat that capsized yesterday and look at it as the story of the world. What is happening in the world that we're building that has created this tolerance for mass death, and especially mass death of Black people who are seeking asylum and seeking protection.
Thank you.
And then you get scared. Then you really start to get scared.
Yep. And we're going to try and walk through a bit of your book, but also about your thoughts on issues we discuss at Skin Deep, which are usually about black and white. But zooming into your story, which is, if I could conclude, you prove that the Black reality is complex. It has layers. And there is no monolith. There is nothing. So by zooming into you and your life, let's start with, who is Nanjala and where did that beautiful name come from? Because then we get a sense of who's giving us all this wisdom.
The word Nanjala, it comes from Western Kenya, and it means a girl born during the dry season, because I was born during the dry season in February. But it also really, in the literal sense, it means a girl during the time of hunger, which I love. Not a lot of people like it because it's a heavy name, so you often don't hear the feminine version, you'll hear the masculine version, which is Wanjala. But I like it because I think it means a person who is ambitious. It is a product, this book, what it reflects is a life journey from someone whose life was very much about her immediate community, family, friends, neighbors, whose life starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger as she travels and starts to see social issues that she once thought were just about her, IDs, identity cards, relation, as being part of this broader international story about place and home and belonging and identity. And one of the things that you said that's really, I'm glad that you picked up on, is I wanted to have a conversation about race that decenters whiteness. Not because I don't think whiteness is a construct that we have to engage with, but because my objective is not, my objective is freedom. I want freedom for people. I don't want people to define their Blackness as what whiteness is not, right? I don't want us to continue to, because that's really the construction of race and is a product of, how, if we think about, for example, colonization and how the dehumanization of African people and Asian people around the world is a product of whiteness, trying to tell the story about the other being savage and scary and whatever. And I want us to think about who we are in the world as Black people beyond being what whiteness is not. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that I was trying to sit in the book, is to deal with that complexity. Okay, so who are we as Black people, as African people, as African women? Who are we in the world when we are not centering whiteness as the standard, as the measure for our identities?